The rain wasn't supposed to fall that night. The forecast had promised dry skies, cool air, and a quiet end to a long November day in Los Angeles. But weather doesn't always listen to forecasts, and neither do people. She sat on the curb beneath a flickering bus stop sign, knees pulled tight against her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold all her pieces together. Her coat, a thin second-hand thing with frayed cuffs, was soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second layer of worry. Raindrops slid down her forehead, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. At 19, she'd already learned that crying didn't fix anything. It just made your face cold and your throat ache. Her name was Lila, though no one had said it out loud in days, not since her aunt had handed her a duffel bag and said, "You can't stay here anymore. Not like this." Not like this, those 3 words had echoed in her head ever since. Not pregnant, not alone, not ashamed, but she was all those things and more. She hadn't planned any of it. Life had a way of slipping through your fingers when you were too busy just trying to keep your head above water. She'd worked 2 part-time jobs, studied at the community college when she could afford the books, and still, rent ate up everything. Then came the nausea, the missed period, the trembling hands as she stared at the little pink lines on the test, and after that, the silence. Her phone stopped ringing. Friends stopped texting. Even her cousin, who used to call every Sunday, now only replied with stiff, polite messages that felt like closed doors. Now, with 8 months of pregnancy weighing heavy in her belly and nowhere to go, she found herself on this rain-slicked sidewalk, watching headlights blur through the downpour. She'd walked for hours, not really knowing where she was headed, just needing to move. The shelter downtown had a waiting list. The youth center was full, and the last friend who'd let her crash on their couch had finally said, gently but firmly, "I can't do this anymore." So here she was, alone, exhausted, and whispering into the wet night air, so softly that even the rain seemed to pause for a second. "I have nowhere to go." She didn't expect anyone to hear. The street was nearly empty, just the occasional car splashing through puddles, drivers hunched over steering wheels, minds already home. She wasn't looking for rescue. She wasn't even hoping for it. She just needed a dry corner, a bench, maybe a doorway where she could rest until morning. But someone did hear. A man walking on the opposite side of the street slowed his pace. He wasn't running for cover like everyone else. He wasn't on the phone or lost in music. He just stopped, turned, looked across the road. She didn't notice him at first. Her eyes were fixed on the pavement, counting cracks like they might spell out an answer. But then she felt it, that quiet shift in the air when someone's attention lands on you. She glanced up. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a worn leather jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was damp, his beard neatly trimmed, his expression unreadable from this distance. But there was something in the way he stood, still unhurried, like he wasn't in a rush to be anywhere else. Most people would have kept walking. Maybe tossed a coin into her lap if they felt generous, or muttered something under their breath if they didn't. But this man crossed the street. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Lila tensed. Her body remembered every warning she'd ever been given. Don't talk to strangers. Don't make eye contact. Don't trust kindness from men you don't know. She shifted slightly, ready to stand, ready to run if she had to. But he stopped a few feet away. Didn't come closer. Didn't loom. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, rain dripping off the brim of his beanie. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was calm. Not loud, not soft. Just real. Like he genuinely wanted to know. Not like he was checking a box or playing hero. Lila hesitated. Part of her wanted to snap back. "Do I look okay?" But another part, the tired, aching part, just wanted to be honest for once. So she looked down again and whispered no. He didn't flinch. Didn't offer empty reassurance like "it'll be fine" or "things could be worse." He just nodded like he understood that sometimes no was the whole truth. After a beat, he asked, "Is there somewhere you need to be tonight?" She almost laughed. Somewhere she needed to be? She hadn't had a somewhere in weeks, but she just shook her head. He was quiet for a moment, watching the rain patter against the sidewalk. Then he pulled out his phone. Not to take a photo, not to scroll. He tapped a few times, held it to his ear. "Hey, it's me," he said quietly. "Yeah, I'm near 6th and Grand." There's a young woman here, pregnant, looks like she's been out in this rain a while. Is there any room at the house tonight? Lila's breath caught. She hadn't told him she was pregnant. She'd been trying to hide it under layers of oversized clothes, hoping no one would notice, but he'd seen. Not in a creepy way, just seen. He listened for a minute, then said, "Thanks. I'll stay with her till you get here." He put the phone away and turned back to her. "A friend runs a small place for women in situations like yours. Transitional housing, prenatal support, that kind of thing. They've got space." "Someone's coming to pick you up." Lila didn't know what to say. Suspicion warred with exhaustion. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't smile, didn't puff up his chest, just shrugged. "Because you said you have nowhere to go. And that shouldn't be true for anyone." She blinked. No grand speech. No, "I'm famous," or "let me fix your life." Just a simple statement, like it was obvious. They stood in silence for a few minutes, the rain easing into a drizzle. Then he unzipped his backpack and pulled out a thermos. "Tea." She stared at it like it might be a trick. "You carry tea in your backpack?" "Always," he said, unscrewing the cap. Steam curled into the cool air. You never know when someone might need something warm. He poured a little into the cap and held it out. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his for just a second. His hands were rough but gentle, the kind that had worked hard but never hurt anyone. She sipped. Chamomile maybe, with a hint of honey. It spread through her chest like a small flame. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded. "You're carrying a lot right now. More than anyone should have to carry alone." She looked at him then, really looked. There was no pity in his eyes. No judgment. Just quiet recognition, like he'd seen pain before, carried some of his own, and knew the weight of it. The car arrived 10 minutes later, a modest sedan, driven by a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense ponytail. She got out, introduced herself as Marlene, and spoke to the man like they'd known each other for years. "You're a good man, Keanu," she said, helping Lila to her feet. Layla froze. "Keanu? As in..." But before she could say anything, he just gave a small wave. "Take care of yourself, Lila." And just like that, he turned and walked away, back into the rain, hands in his pockets, disappearing around the corner like he was just another person on a wet night in the city. She didn't chase after him. Didn't call out. She just stood there, clutching the thermos cap, warmth spreading through her hands and her heart. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible, and as Marlene helped her into the car, Lila realized something. Sometimes help doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up in a leather jacket carrying tea and asks only one question: "You okay?" Before changing everything, the engine hummed to life. The wipers swept the rain from the windshield, and as they drove away from the bus stop, Lila leaned her head against the window, closed her eyes, and let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't sleep much that first night at the house. Not because it wasn't safe, quite the opposite. The place was quiet, clean and warm, with soft blankets and a nightlight in the hallway that glowed like a tiny lighthouse. But after weeks of sleeping with one eye open, curled up on couches that weren't hers or benches that smelled of old rain, her body didn't know how to relax. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren sent her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Still, it was the best kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from relief, not fear. She'd eaten a real meal for the first time in days. Lentil soup, warm bread, and a slice of apple pie that tasted like someone had baked it with care, not just convenience. Marlene, the woman who'd picked her up, hadn't asked for her life story. She'd just shown her to a small room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto a backyard with a lemon tree. "You're safe here," she'd said simply. "Rest. We'll talk in the morning." And now, as dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and grays, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. She'd barely let herself touch it these past few weeks. Not out of shame exactly, but out of fear. Fear that if she acknowledged the life growing inside her, she'd have to face the truth. She was going to be a mother. Alone. Unprepared. Unworthy, maybe. But something had shifted in her chest last night. Not because of the warm bed or the hot meal, but because of the quiet man in the rain who hadn't looked away. He hadn't treated her like a problem to be solved or a cautionary tale. He'd just seen her. And in that moment, she'd felt human again. By mid-morning, Marlene knocked gently on her door. "Breakfast is ready. And your first appointment's at 10 prenatal checkup. We've got a clinic that partners with us. They'll take good care of you." Lila nodded, suddenly nervous. Do I have to pay?" Marlene smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd heard that question too many times. "No, everything here is covered. You just have to show up, be honest, and take care of yourself and that baby." The clinic was small but bright, with walls painted in soft blues and greens, children's drawings taped to the bulletin boards, and a receptionist who greeted her by name before she even reached the desk. The doctor was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with calm precision. She didn't rush. She asked how Lila was feeling, not just physically but emotionally, and for the first time Lila didn't lie. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded. "That's normal. But you're not alone anymore." After the exam, everything was fine. The baby was healthy, strong heartbeat. Lila was given vitamins, a folder of resources, and an invitation to join a weekly support group for expectant mothers staying at the house. "It's not therapy," Marlene explained later over tea in the kitchen. "Just women sharing stories, tips, sometimes just sitting in silence together. You don't have to talk, but it helps to know you're not the only one walking this road." Days turned into a rhythm. Mornings began with gentle stretches in the shared living room, guided by a volunteer yoga instructor who came every Tuesday and Thursday. Afternoons were for appointments, job applications, or helping in the community garden out back, pulling weeds, watering seedlings, learning how to grow kale and tomatoes. It wasn't glamorous work, but it grounded her, literally. Her hands in the soil, the sun on her face, the quiet company of other women who understood without needing explanations. She started talking more. Not all at once, not about everything, but little things. How she missed her little sister, how she used to love drawing, how she'd once dreamed of being a graphic designer before life got complicated. The other women listened. Sometimes they shared their own dreams, their own regrets. No one judged. No one offered unsolicited advice. They just held space. One evening, while folding laundry in the sunroom, a woman named Tasha, 7 months along, with a laugh like wind chimes, asked, "So who was the guy in the rain?" Lila paused, a baby onesie halfway folded. "How did you—" "Marlene told us," Tasha said gently. "She said you were found by someone famous. Said he just—" Stopped. Lila didn't know how to explain it. He didn't act famous. He acted like a person. "Like anyone would have done the same," Tasha snorted. "Honey, most people wouldn't have even looked twice." Lila knew she was right, and yet she didn't want to make it into a spectacle. She didn't want to be the girl Keanu Reeves saved. That wasn't what it felt like. It felt like a stranger had handed her a lifeline when she was drowning, and then walked away so she could climb out on her own. Still, the memory stayed with her. Not as a miracle, but as a reminder. Kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. 3 weeks passed. Lila enrolled in an online course in digital design, something she could do from the house at her own pace. She started sketching again, filling a notebook with doodles of baby animals, constellations, and the lemon tree in the backyard. She even laughed one afternoon when Amara, she'd started calling the baby that in her head, though she hadn't told anyone, kicked so hard she nearly spilled her tea. Then, one gray afternoon, a plain white envelope appeared on the kitchen table. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in neat, slanting handwriting. She opened it slowly, half expecting a bill or a notice. Instead, she found a gift card to a baby supply store downtown and a small note. "You've got this." Her breath caught. She turned the note over as if there might be more. But that was it. 3 words, a signature, and enough to buy diapers, onesies, a car seat. Tasha peeked over her shoulder. No way. Lila just nodded, tears welling up, not from sadness but from the sheer quiet weight of being remembered. Later, she asked Marlene, "Does he do this often?" Marlene stirred her coffee, thoughtful. "He's been connected to this place for years. Funds a few beds quietly. Never wants credit. Never shows up unless it's to drop off supplies or sit with a kid who's having a hard day. He doesn't see it as charity. He sees it as showing up." That night, Lila sat by the window, the gift card resting on her palm. She thought about the rain, The thermos, the way he'd stood there like the whole world could wait while he made sure she was okay. She hadn't thanked him properly. Hadn't even gotten the chance. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that someone had chosen to care when they didn't have to. And that choice had given her the space to breathe, to heal, to believe she could be more than her worst moment. The next morning, she went to the baby store. She bought soft cotton onesies in pale yellow and sage green, a blanket with tiny stars and a stuffed rabbit with floppy ears. As she walked out bag in hand, she paused under the awning just like that night and looked up at the sky. It wasn't raining. She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't whisper to the empty air. She spoke aloud, quiet but sure. We're going to be okay. Back at the house, she tucked the stuffed rabbit into the drawer of her nightstand. Not for the baby yet. For herself. A reminder that tenderness still existed in the world, and that sometimes it arrived in the most unexpected ways. Weeks passed. Her belly grew. Her confidence grew with it. She started helping new arrivals, making tea, showing them where the extra towels were, sitting with them in silence when words weren't enough. She didn't have all the answers, but she had presence, and sometimes that was enough. One evening, during the support group, a new girl, barely 18, eyes wide with panic, whispered, "I don't know how to do this." Lila reached over and squeezed her hand. "You don't have to know everything right now. Just take the next step." Then the one after that. The girl nodded, tears spilling over. And in that moment, Lila realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone who could help others survive too. All because one man on a rainy night chose to stop walking. The weeks blurred together in a gentle rhythm, mornings with tea and stretching, afternoons spent sketching or tending to the garden, evenings filled with quiet conversations and the soft hum of women preparing for the biggest change of their lives. Lila's belly grew rounder, her steps slower but steadier, and the fear that once coiled tight in her chest began to loosen, replaced by something quieter, stronger, hope. She was 3 weeks away from her due date when the second envelope arrived. This time, it was tucked into the mailbox outside the house, addressed simply to Lila. No last name, no return address, just her name in that same careful handwriting. She opened it right there on the porch, the late afternoon sun warming her shoulders. Inside was another gift card, this one for a local grocery store, and a note that read, "Eat well. You're doing great. Kay." She stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was the fact that he remembered, that he was still paying attention from a distance without expecting anything in return. No interviews, no photos, no grand gestures. Just quiet, consistent care. Tasha found her on the porch a few minutes later, arms crossed, grinning. "Let me guess. The mystery man strikes again?" Lila nodded, folding the note and tucking it into her pocket like a secret talisman. He didn't have to do this. Not once, let alone twice. "Maybe he knows what it's like," Tasha said softly, sitting beside her on the steps. "To lose people. To carry grief. To wonder if anyone sees you." Lila hadn't thought about that before. She'd only ever seen him as the helper, the calm presence in the storm. But everyone has a story. Everyone carries weight. Maybe his kindness wasn't just generosity. It was understanding. That night she lay in bed, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding the note under her pillow. She thought about the life she was about to bring into the world. Would her daughter know what it meant to be seen, to be helped without being judged? Lila made a silent promise then. No matter how hard things got, she would never let her child feel invisible. The next morning, she went to the grocery store. She bought fresh fruit, whole grain bread, eggs, and a small carton of almond milk, things she'd been skipping because they cost a little more. As she walked through the aisles, she caught herself smiling. Not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because for the first time in a long time she felt like she deserved to take care of herself. Back at the house, she started planning for the birth. Not just the logistics, the hospital bag, the ride, the breathing exercises, but the emotional part too. She wrote letters to her unborn daughter, little notes she'd tuck into a journal to give her one day. "You were wanted even when I was scared." One read, "You were loved before you took your first breath." Marlene noticed the change in her. "You're glowing," she said one afternoon as they sorted donated baby clothes. Lila laughed. Or I'm just really tired and my face is puffy. No, Marlene insisted gently. It's more than that. You've found your footing. And she had. She'd finished her first online course in digital design and even landed a small freelance gig, designing a logo for a local bakery. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Proof that she could build something, even from broken pieces. Then, 10 days before her due date, her water broke in the middle of the night. It wasn't dramatic, no gush, no panic, just a slow, warm trickle that woke her from a deep sleep. She sat up, heart pounding, and took a few slow breaths. She'd practiced this. She knew what to do. She called Marlene, who was at her door in minutes, calm and efficient. Okay, sweetheart. Let's get you to the hospital. The drive was quiet except for the soft jazz playing on the radio and Lila's steady breathing. She held onto the stuffed rabbit she'd bought weeks ago, its floppy ears worn soft from being clutched so often. She didn't pray, not in the traditional sense, but she whispered into the dark. Please let her be okay. Please let me be enough. At the hospital, everything moved smoothly. The nurses knew her from her prenatal visits. They greeted her by name, helped her into a gown, and made sure she had everything she needed. Marlene stayed with her through the early contractions, holding her hand, reminding her to breathe, and then, just as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose, she held her daughter for the first time, Amara. She'd settled on the name the night before after reading it in an old book of poetry. It meant grace or eternal in some languages. It felt right. The baby was small but strong, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that blinked slowly, as if already taking in the world with quiet curiosity. Lila cried, not from pain but from awe. This tiny person had grown inside her through fear, loneliness, and rain-soaked nights. And now here she was, real, breathing, hers. Marlene stood by the window, tears in her own eyes. She's beautiful, Lila. Lila nodded, unable to speak. She traced Amara's cheek with one finger, marveling at the softness of her skin, the way her tiny fingers curled around Lila's thumb like she'd known it her whole life. In the days that followed, the house became a sanctuary of new beginnings. Women took turns bringing meals, folding tiny laundry, and holding Amara while Lila rested. Tasha even knitted a little hat with a pom-pom on top. For when she's ready to take over the world, she joked. Lila started a blog, not for fame, not for followers, but because she needed to make sense of everything that had happened. She wrote about the bus stop, the rain, the thermos of tea, the envelopes that arrived like quiet blessings. She didn't mention his name, not because she was hiding it, but because the story wasn't about him. It was about what his kindness had unlocked in her, the belief that she mattered. The blog grew slowly. Other young mothers found it. They left comments like, "This gave me hope," or, "I felt so alone until I read this." Some even reached out privately, asking for advice, for reassurance. Lila answered every message. She remembered how it felt to be invisible. She wasn't going to let anyone else feel that way if she could help it. 6 weeks after Amara's birth, she received a third envelope. This one was thicker. Inside was a children's book. The Rabbit Listened, and a note. For Amara, and for you. Keep listening to each other. K. She read the book that night, curled up in the rocking chair with Amara asleep against her chest. It was a simple story about a rabbit who didn't try to fix things, didn't offer advice, just sat quietly with a friend who was hurting. Lila cried again, but this time it was a release, a recognition. That's what he'd done. He hadn't tried to solve her life. He'd just sat with her in the rain. A few months later, she was invited to speak at a local youth center about resilience and community support. She brought Amara in a sling, her heart pounding as she stood in front of a room full of teenagers, some foster kids, some runaways, some just trying to figure out who they were. She didn't tell them she'd been saved by a celebrity. She told them she'd been saved by someone choosing to care. "You don't need to be famous to make a difference," she said, voice steady now. "You just need to stop walking when you see someone hurting. Sometimes that's enough to change a life." Afterward, a girl with bright green hair and tired eyes approached her. "Did it really work out for you?" she asked quietly. Lila looked down at Amara, who was sucking on her fingers, eyes wide and trusting. "Not perfectly, but better than I ever thought possible." The girl nodded like she was storing that truth away for later. On the walk home, Lila passed a bus stop. It wasn't the same one, but it looked similar. Metal bench, flickering sign, rain puddles drying in the sun. She paused for just a second, then kept walking. She didn't need to go back to that night to remember it. It lived in her now, in the way she held Amara, in the way she listened to others, in the quiet certainty that even in the darkest rain, someone might stop and offer tea. And that was enough. More than enough, because now she wasn't just surviving, she was becoming the kind of person who stops for others too. Time has a way of softening edges. The sharp panic of those early days, the fear, the loneliness, the feeling of falling with no ground in sight, had faded into something quieter, something woven into the fabric of who Lila had become. Amara was almost 3 now, a whirlwind of giggles, sticky fingers, and endless questions about clouds, bugs, and why the moon followed them home at night. Her hair was a wild tangle of curls, her eyes wide with the kind of wonder that only comes before the world teaches you to be cautious. Lila worked part-time from home, designing simple graphics for small businesses, and spent her mornings at the community garden, the same one where she'd once pulled weeds with trembling hands. Now she taught other young parents how to grow tomatoes and kale, how to compost, how to find peace in the rhythm of planting and waiting. She'd also started leading a weekly support circle at the youth center, not as a counselor, but as someone who'd walked the path and was willing to sit with others while they found their footing. She never talked about that rainy night in public. Not because it was secret, but because it felt too personal, too sacred. When people asked how she'd gotten through it, she'd just say, "A stranger showed me kindness when I needed it most." That was enough. Then came the invitation. It arrived in her email one Tuesday morning while Amara was napping. A local nonprofit that worked with unhoused teens was hosting a community panel on youth homelessness, mental health, and the power of mentorship. They'd read her blog, heard her speak at the center, and wanted her to share her story, not as a victim, but as someone who'd rebuilt. They also mentioned that a few guest volunteers would be there, including some longtime supporters of their programs. She almost said no. Public speaking still made her stomach flutter. But then Amara woke up, rubbing her eyes and calling, "Mama, dream about butterflies." And Lila remembered why she did this. Not for herself, for the girl she'd been, for the kids still sitting on curbs whispering into the rain. She said yes. The event was held in a converted warehouse downtown. Warm wood floors, string lights, rows of mismatched chairs. Lila arrived early, Amara clinging to her leg, wide-eyed at the crowd gathering. A volunteer took them to a quiet corner with toys and books. "She's welcome to stay," the woman said kindly. "We believe kids belong everywhere." Lila smiled. "Thank you." As she settled Amara with a board book about stars, she glanced around the room. There were counselors, social workers, former foster youth, teachers, and a few faces she didn't recognize. One man stood near the coffee table pouring himself a cup, talking quietly with the program director. He wore a dark sweater, jeans, and that same worn leather jacket she remembered from years ago. Her breath caught. It was him, Keanu. He looked older, more lines around his eyes, a little more gray in his beard, but the same quiet presence. He wasn't holding court, wasn't signing autographs, just listening, nodding, asking questions like he genuinely cared about the answer. She didn't approach him, didn't stare. She turned back to Amara, who was now stacking blocks into a wobbly tower, but her heart beat a little faster. The panel began. Lila spoke third. She talked about fear, about shame, about how easy it is to disappear when you feel like you don't belong. She talked about the moment someone chose to see her, not as a problem, but as a person. "That moment didn't fix my life," she said, voice steady, "but it gave me the space to fix it myself." Afterward, people came up to thank her. A teenager with a nose ring hugged her. An older woman pressed a handmade bracelet into her palm. And then, as the crowd thinned, she felt that familiar shift in the air, the kind that happens when someone's attention lands on you gently. She turned. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, no fanfare, no cameras. Just him. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. Amara looked up from her blocks, curious. "Who dat? This is—" "A friend," Lila said, unsure what else to call him. He crouched down slightly, Not too close, just enough to be at Amara's level. "Hey there." Amara studied him for a long moment, then grinned. "You got nice eyes," he laughed, a quiet, warm sound. "Thank you." Then he stood, turning back to Lila. "She's beautiful." "She is," Lila said, pride swelling in her chest. "Her name's Amara." "Amara," he repeated like he was memorizing it. "It suits her." They stood in comfortable silence for a beat. No awkwardness. No need to fill the space with words. Finally, he asked, "How are you?" Not "how's life?" Not "everything good?" Just "how are you?" Like he really wanted to know. "I'm okay," she said. "Better than okay. I run a little support group now. For girls like I was." He nodded, eyes soft. "That's good. Really good." She hesitated, then asked the question that had lived in her for years. "Why did you stop that night?" He didn't look away. "Because no one should have to say they have nowhere to go and mean it," she swallowed. "I never got to thank you properly." "You don't have to," he said gently. "You're living your thanks every day." Amara tugged on Lila's sleeve. "Mama, can we go see the butterflies now?" Lila smiled. "Soon, sweet pea." He glanced at the little girl, then back at Lila. "You've done an incredible thing." "No," she said. "We both did. You gave me a chance. I just took it." He didn't argue. Didn't deflect. Just gave a small, humble nod. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked, "Do you still carry that stuffed rabbit?" She blinked, surprised he remembered. "She sleeps with it every night." He smiled, just a flicker, but it reached his eyes. "Good." Before she could say more, a staff member called his name. He turned, then looked back at her. "Take care of yourselves." "You too," she said, and just like that, he walked away, not dramatically, not with a wave, just slipping back into the flow of the room like any other person doing what they believed in. Amara tugged her hand again. "Mama, who was that?" Lila watched him disappear through the double doors, then looked down at her daughter. "Someone who reminded me that the world isn't as cold as it sometimes feels." Amara nodded solemnly as if that made perfect sense. Then she held up her block tower. "Look, I built a house." Lila knelt beside her. "It's a beautiful house." Later, as they walked home under a sky streaked with sunset, Amara chattered about butterflies and blocks and the nice man with kind eyes. Lila listened, her heart full in a way she never thought possible. She didn't tell Amara the whole story, not yet. But one day she would, not to glorify fame, but to teach her this: that goodness exists in quiet acts. That heroes don't always wear capes. They sometimes wear leather jackets and carry thermoses of tea. Back at their small apartment, now filled with drawings on the fridge, tiny shoes by the door, and a lemon tree thriving on the balcony, Lila made dinner while Amara played with her stuffed rabbit. The ordinary magic of a safe home, a full belly, a child who felt loved. That night, after tucking Amara in, Lila sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, her own thermos now, a gift from Tasha. She looked up at the stars and thought about how far she'd come. She wasn't the girl on the curb anymore, but she hadn't forgotten her, and maybe that was the point, not to leave her behind, but to carry her forward with tenderness, so she could keep reaching back for others still in the rain. A few days later, while sorting mail, she found another envelope, plain white, her name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a children's book about kindness, a gift card to the local grocery store, and a note. "Keep going. You're doing great." She smiled, tucked the note into Amara's journal, and went back to making pancakes, because life wasn't about grand rescues, it was about showing up. Again and again, and sometimes that was everything. The years rolled on like seasons, some dry, some stormy, but always moving forward. Amara was 8 now, all scraped knees, library books, and bold opinions about fairness. She'd started her own kindness club at school, where kids left anonymous notes of encouragement in each other's lockers. "Everyone deserves to feel seen," she'd told Lila one evening, stirring pancake batter with fierce concentration. Lila had nearly dropped the spatula. Where had she heard that? Then she remembered. It was something she'd said during a talk at the youth center, not knowing her daughter was listening from the back row. Lila's little support group had grown, too, not into something flashy, but into something real. What started as a weekly coffee and conversation circle in the community garden had become a small nonprofit called The Next Step. It wasn't housed in a fancy building. Just a converted garage behind the old community center, painted sky blue with mismatched furniture, a fridge full of juice boxes, and a wall covered in drawings from kids who'd passed through. They offered emergency housing referrals, prenatal care coordination, job training workshops, and most importantly, a place where no one had to explain why they were there. She never used his name in any of it. Not in grant applications, not in interviews, not even in private conversations with her closest friends. The story belonged to her journey, not to his fame. She wanted the focus to stay on the young women who walked through her door, scared, tired, sometimes silent for days, until they realized they weren't broken, just bent. And bent things can be straightened with time, care, and someone who believes in them. Still, every December, like clockwork, a plain white envelope would appear in her mailbox. No return address, no fanfare, just a gift card. Sometimes for groceries, sometimes for baby supplies, once for art supplies for the kids' program. And a note that always said the same thing. Keep going. Kay, she never wrote back. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew he didn't need thanks. He needed to know the ripple was still moving. And so she kept going. One rainy afternoon, much like the one from all those years ago, Lila sat at her desk, reviewing applications for their emergency housing fund. Outside, the city glistened under a steady drizzle. Amara was at a friend's house, and the quiet hum of the space felt peaceful, not lonely. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find a girl, couldn't have been more than 17, standing under the awning, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, eyes red-rimmed but dry. She looked exactly like Lila had once looked, exhausted, wary, holding herself together by sheer will. I heard this place helps people, the girl said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere else. Lila didn't ask for paperwork, didn't make her fill out a form right away. She just stepped aside. Come in. You're safe here. She made tea, chamomile with honey, and sat with the girl in silence for a while, just like someone had once done for her. No pressure, no questions, just presence. Later, after showing her to a spare room with fresh sheets and a nightlight, Lila returned to her office. On her desk, pinned above her calendar, was a faded photo she'd taken years ago. A bus stop on a rainy night, empty except for a wet bench and a puddle reflecting the streetlight. Beneath it, in her own handwriting, was a quote she'd carried with her ever since. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop walking. She touched the edge of the photo gently, not with longing, but with gratitude. That night after tucking Amara in, home now, hair still damp from the rain, Lila sat on the porch with her thermos. The city lights shimmered through the drizzle. She thought about how far she'd come, not in miles, but in heart, from a girl who believed she was unworthy of help to a woman who built a home for others who felt the same. She never set out to be a leader. She just refused to let anyone feel as alone as she once had. A few weeks later, the Next Step hosted its annual community dinner, a potluck under string lights, with music from a local teen band and kids running barefoot through the grass. Former participants came back to volunteer. Some brought their toddlers. Others brought job offers they wanted to share. It wasn't perfect. There were still tears, still setbacks. But there was also laughter and hope. Real, stubborn, everyday hope. As Lila handed out plates of lasagna, Amara ran up, breathless. Mama, we collected 50 notes for the kindness jar. That's amazing, Lila said, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. Do you think maybe one day I can run this place? Lila's throat tightened. If you want to, but only if you promise to always listen more than you speak. Amara nodded seriously. I will. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Lila stood by the lemon tree, the same one from the backyard of the old house, now transplanted into a large pot on the patio. It had survived droughts, storms, and 2 moves, and every spring without fail it bloomed. She thought about the envelopes, the quiet consistency, the way someone had chosen over and over to believe in her long before she believed in herself. She didn't need to meet him again, didn't need a reunion or a photo op. What mattered was that the thread of kindness hadn't broken. It had been passed from him to her, from her to dozens of others, and now, maybe, to her daughter. That was legacy enough. Back inside, The girl from the rain sat at a table with Tasha and two other young women, laughing at something one of them had said. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her hands weren't clenched. She was still healing, but she was no longer drowning. Lila watched her for a moment, then turned to help clear dishes. Life wasn't about grand rescues. It was about small, steady acts of courage, showing up, speaking gently, offering tea, remembering names, believing in people even when they couldn't believe in themselves. And sometimes, years later, you look around and realize you've built a whole world out of those small things. Every December, the envelope still comes. She doesn't know how he finds her, whether it's through Marlene, through quiet word of mouth, or just because he never forgot. But she knows this: she'll keep the note. She'll use the gift card to buy diapers for someone who needs them, and she'll keep going, because someone once stopped walking for her, and now it's her turn to stop for others. The rain had let up. Stars peeked through the clouds. Inside, music played, children laughed, and a new chapter quietly began, not with a bang, but with a warm meal, a listening ear, and the simple, powerful truth that no one should ever have to say, "I have nowhere to go," and mean it. And in that truth, Lila had found her purpose, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a bridge, and that was more than enough.